My son handed me mortgage papers for a house I'd never seen and said, "You've saved enough, Dad. Time to help your family." I looked at the $380,000 price tag and said, "No." 2 weeks later, they sued me for everything I had. I'm Aaron Sullivan, but everyone calls me Tank. I'm 68 years old and spent 22 years as a Marine before running a small auto repair shop for another 25. I thought I'd seen everything until the day I got served papers by my own flesh and blood. The trouble started on a sweltering Saturday in July. I was under the hood of my 008 Silverado, replacing the alternator that had been acting up for weeks. The garage was my sanctuary, filled with the familiar smells of motor oil and WD-40. Tools hung in perfect order on pegboard walls, just like we kept our gear in the Marines. Order means survival, whether you're in a foxhole or under a transmission. Christopher pulled up in a brand new Audi A6, silver paint job so fresh it still had that dealer smell wafting through. The open windows. 6 months ago, this same boy was asking me for gas money because he got restructured out of his telemarketing job. Now he's driving a car that costs more than I made in 2 years when I was a sergeant. He didn't get out right away. He was on the phone, probably with Amanda, his wife. She's 29 and spends more time staging photos of her breakfast than most people spend eating it. Through the windshield, I could see him gesturing wildly, his face red like he was arguing. When he finally stepped out, he was carrying a thick manila folder and had that look on his face I remembered from when he was 12 and had broken something expensive. "Dad, we need to talk," he said, not bothering with hello or how's the truck running. His military bearing was long gone, replaced by the slouchy posture of someone who'd never learned real discipline. I'd tried to get him to consider the Marines after high school, but he said college was his thing. College, where he majored in business and minored in video games. "About what?" I asked, wiping grease off my hands with a shop rag that had seen better decades. "About our future. Amanda and I found the perfect house. It's in Riverside Oaks, that gated community out past the mall. Great schools for Isaac, swimming pool, the works." Isaac is my 10-year-old grandson, the only good thing to come out of Christopher's marriage, and the only reason I tolerate Amanda's constant social media nonsense. I looked at the folder like it might contain anthrax. "How much?" $380,000. Dad, it's a steal in today's market. 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, granite countertops, stainless steel appliances. It's the kind of place Isaac deserves to grow up in. I set down my socket wrench and really looked at my son. "Christopher, what's your down payment?" His face tightened like he'd been caught in a lie. "That's why I'm here. We need $76,000 for the down payment, plus another $40,000 to get current on our credit cards. So, we can qualify for the mortgage." I raised an eyebrow. I don't remember co-signing any applications or walking through any model homes. "Dad, you've got over $450,000 in retirement savings just sitting there. You're 68 years old, living alone in a house that's way too big for you. You're sitting on all that money while your family struggles to get ahead." I leaned against the Silverado's fender, feeling the heat from the engine block through my coveralls. "Struggle? You mean like when I worked 60-hour weeks to put you through college? Or when your mother and I ate hamburger helper for a month so you could go on that spring break trip to Cancun?" "That was different, Dad." "How's it different?" "You were young then. You had time to rebuild, to recover. Now you're just hoarding money you can't take with you. What's the point of having all that cash if you're not going to help your only son?" The disrespect hit me like a punch to the gut. This from the boy I'd taught to change oil, to throw a curveball, to stand up when a woman enters the room. This from the kid who used to follow me around the shop asking endless questions about carburetors and timing belts. Christopher, I worked for every dollar of that money, crawled under cars in 20-degree weather, deployed to places where people shot at me for 13 months at a time. That money isn't just sitting there. It's my security, my healthcare fund, my what if something goes wrong buffer. "We're your family," he said, his voice rising to that whiny pitch I remembered from his teenage years. "We are your emergency. Isaac is your only grandchild. Don't you want him to have the best? I want him to learn that the best things in life come from work, not handouts." Christopher's face went from red to purple. He slammed the folder down on my workbench, scattering the carefully organized bolts I'd been sorting. "Fine, Dad. But don't come crying to us when you're old and alone in some nursing home. Don't. Expect us to take care of you when you wouldn't take care of us." I watched him storm back to his Audi, engine revving like he was 17 again. The smell of burning rubber lingered long after he disappeared down Oak Street. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning when I was having my coffee and reading about the Cubs' latest disappointing season, the sheriff's deputy knocked on my door. "Aaron Sullivan?" he asked, looking at his clipboard. "That's me." He handed me an envelope thick enough to choke a horse. "You've been served, sir." The lawsuit papers felt heavier than they should have. Breach of oral contract. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Promissory estoppel. Christopher and Amanda were suing me for $380,000, claiming I'd promised them the money at Isaac's 10th birthday party last year and then maliciously reneged on my commitment. I remembered that party. Christopher had mentioned wanting to buy a house someday, and I'd said, "Son, if you save up for a down payment and get your credit straight, I might help with closing costs." Closing costs, maybe $5,000. Not a mansion in Riverside Oaks with a pool and a 3-car garage. But the lawsuit wasn't the worst part. That came 3 days later when First National Bank called me at 7 a.m. on a Friday morning. "Mr. Sullivan, this is Helen Stewart from our fraud department. We've detected some unusual activity on accounts associated with your Social Security number. Do you have a few minutes to review some recent credit applications?" I was still in my bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, looking out at the bird feeder I'd built for my late wife, Margaret. She'd loved watching the Cardinals and Blue Jays fight over the sunflower seeds. "What kind of applications?" 3 credit cards opened in the past 2 months. American Express, Chase, and a store card for Brookstone Furniture. The total credit limit across all 3 accounts is $62,000, and they're currently showing a combined balance of $45,000. The coffee mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the kitchen floor. "Lady, I haven't applied for any credit cards. Someone's using my identity." "I'm afraid it gets worse, Mr. Sullivan. The billing address on all 3 accounts is listed as 412 Maple Grove Apartment 3B. Does that address mean anything to you?" It meant everything to me. That was Christopher and Amanda's apartment, the place where I'd spent countless Sunday dinners watching Isaac play with his toy cars, while his parents scrolled through their phones. The place where I'd helped them move their furniture when their lease was up last year. The place where, 6 months ago, I'd sat at their kitchen table helping Christopher navigate the VA website to update my disability claim. He'd said the forms were confusing, that he'd handle the data entry while I answered the questions. "Dad, you just relax and let me type this stuff in. These government websites are a nightmare for anyone over 50. I'd been grateful. I'd thought he was being a good son. Turns out he was being a good thief, memorizing my Social Security number and saving it in his phone for later use. "Can you send me copies of the applications and statements?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'll email everything within the hour. Mr. Sullivan, I have to ask, do you have any family members who might have access to your personal information?" I looked at the photo on my refrigerator. Christopher, Amanda, and Isaac at last year's Christmas dinner, all smiles and fake family harmony. "Yeah," I said. "I might have an idea." The statements arrived like a catalog of betrayal. $18,000 at Brookstone Furniture, leather sectional sofa, dining room set, king-size bedroom suite. $15,000 at Best Buy, 75-inch TV, sound system, gaming equipment, MacBook Pro. $7,000 at some boutique called Amanda's Closet, designer clothes, handbags, shoes. Another $5,000 in cash advances, probably to cover their rent when Christopher's unemployment ran out. They'd been furnishing their dream house with my credit while planning to sue me for the down payment. It was the perfect scam. Use Dad's identity to buy everything they needed, then force Dad to pay for the house to put it all in. When I refused, they'd activated Plan B, take me to court and claim I was a heartless father who broke his promises. I called my old Marine buddy, Brian Fletcher. He'd done 20 years in the Corps, then another 20 with Chicago PD before starting his own private investigation firm. We'd served together in Desert Storm, and when Brian Fletcher tells you someone's lying, you can take it to the bank. "Tank, what's got you calling at this hour?" His voice was gravelly from too many years of cigarettes and not enough sleep. "I need surveillance on my son," I said. The words tasted like poison in my mouth. "I think he's running some kind of con on me." "Your boy Christopher? The one who is going to be a big businessman?" "That's the one. Brian, I need to know what he's really doing with his days, who he's talking to, how he's spending money, and I need it documented." "This is going to cost you, Tank. Surveillance isn't cheap." "Neither is getting robbed by your own family. Do it." Brian's report came back 48 hours later, and it was worse than I'd imagined. Christopher wasn't running any consulting business like he claimed on social media. Every morning at 9 a.m., he'd leave their apartment in his leased Audi, drive to the Starbucks on 5th Street, order a $6 latte, and sit there for exactly 90 minutes scrolling through his phone. Then he'd drive home, park the Audi, and disappear into their apartment until Amanda returned from what she called her business meetings. Those business meetings? Shopping trips to upscale stores, funded by credit cards in my name. Brian had photos of her coming out of Nordstrom with bags worth more than my monthly Social Security check, posting Instagram stories about her successful day, building her brand. The worst part was watching Christopher lie to Isaac. Brian had audio from the surveillance outside Isaac's school. "Daddy has to work really hard so we can move to the big house with the swimming pool. Grandpa's just being difficult because he doesn't understand modern business." Isaac, bless his heart, had asked, "But why doesn't Grandpa want us to be happy?" "Some people get mean when they get old, buddy. They forget how to be generous." I had to stop the recording there. I walked out to my garage and punched the heavy bag I'd installed when I got back from the Gulf. I hit it until my knuckles bled and my shoulder ached, trying to work out the rage that was building in my chest like steam in a pressure cooker. The boy I'd taught to ride a bike was using my grandson as a weapon against me. The son I'd carried on my shoulders at Cubs games was poisoning my only grandchild's mind with lies about my character. This wasn't just theft anymore. This was psychological warfare. I called Elizabeth Martinez, the lawyer my VFW post had recommended. She was a former Army JAG officer who understood military honor and had a reputation for eating con artists for breakfast. "Mr. Sullivan, I've reviewed the materials you sent. This isn't just a civil matter anymore. Your son has committed federal crimes, identity theft, wire fraud, bank fraud. If we pursue this fully, he's looking at serious prison time." "What do you recommend?" "We let them file their lawsuit. We let them put their lies on public record. Then we destroy them with the truth." Elizabeth Martinez's office looked like a war room. The walls were lined with law books and military commendations. Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Combat Action Ribbon. She understood honor in a way that Christopher's billboard lawyer never would. "Aaron, I've subpoenaed their bank records, credit reports, and loan application documents. What we've found is a pattern of systematic fraud that goes back months." She spread documents across her conference table like a battlefield map. "Your son didn't just steal your identity for credit cards. He's been building a false financial profile to support a mortgage application. I leaned forward, studying the papers. What do you mean? Look at this. She pointed to a document with the First National Bank letterhead. This is a gift letter that Christopher submitted as part of his mortgage application. It's dated July 15th and states that you've already given him the $76,000 down payment. I stared at the signature at the bottom. Gerald Aaron Sullivan. It looked like my handwriting, but something was off. The A in Aaron was too round, the S in Sullivan too neat. I never signed this. I know. We pulled your VA medical records. On July 15th, you were at the Phoenix VA hospital for your annual checkup. You couldn't have been in Chicago signing bank documents. The pieces were falling into place like a complex engine repair. Christopher hadn't just stolen my money. He'd forged my signature to convince the bank I was already committed to funding his house purchase. When I refused to actually provide the money, he'd filed the lawsuit claiming I was breaking my promise. This is bank fraud, I said. Federal bank fraud, Elizabeth corrected. He submitted false documents to a federally insured institution. If we can prove this in court, he's not just losing the civil case, he's going to federal prison. The next 2 months were like preparing for deployment. Elizabeth and I went through every document, every piece of evidence, every witness statement. She interviewed my neighbors, who confirmed I'd been in Phoenix on the 15th. She got security footage from the VA hospital showing me in the waiting room. She even tracked down the nurse who'd drawn my blood that morning. Meanwhile, Christopher and Amanda were getting desperate. The credit cards had been frozen when I reported the fraud, and they couldn't make their monthly payments on the Audi or their apartment. I started getting phone calls from Christopher, pleading and threatening by turns. Dad, please, just drop this. We can work something out. I'll pay you back every penny. Son, you forged my signature. You stole my identity. There's no working this out. It was just paperwork, Dad. The bank needed something on file. I was going to fix it once you came through with the money. But I never promised you the money, Christopher. Not like this. You're going to destroy your own family over money? What would Mom think? That one hit deep. Margaret had always believed in second chances, in forgiveness, in keeping the family together no matter what. But Margaret had never dealt with federal wire fraud and forged documents. 2 weeks before the trial, Amanda tried a different approach. She showed up at my house with Isaac, using my grandson as a human shield. Grandpa? Isaac ran up my front steps and wrapped his arms around my waist. I hadn't seen him in 3 months, and he'd grown at least 2 inches. Mom says you're mad at us. I knelt down to his level, looking into eyes that reminded me so much of Christopher at that age. I'm not mad at you, buddy. Not ever. Amanda stood at the edge of my driveway, arms crossed, wearing a designer jacket she'd probably bought with my stolen credit. Aaron, we need to talk. This lawsuit is tearing the family apart. You brought the lawsuit, Amanda. You and Christopher. Because you left us no choice. You promised us that money, and then you just changed your mind. Do you know what that did to us? We'd already put down earnest money. We'd already told Isaac about his new room. I looked at Isaac, who was examining my tools on the front porch with the serious concentration of a future engineer. Isaac, why don't you go check on the bird feeder out back? I think the Blue Jays knocked it crooked again. He scampered off, and I turned back to Amanda. You want to talk about choices? Let's talk about the choice to open credit cards in my name. Let's talk about the choice to forge my signature. Let's talk about the choice to teach my grandson that his grandfather is a liar. We never said you were a liar. Christopher told him I was being difficult, that I'd forgotten how to be generous. I've got recordings, Amanda. Her face went pale. You had us followed? I protected myself from thieves. That's what you do when your family tries to rob you blind. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling, probably looking for a text from Christopher telling her what to say next. These two couldn't tie their shoes without consulting each other first. Look, Aaron, maybe we made some mistakes. Maybe things got out of hand. But we're willing to settle. Drop the fraud charges and we'll drop the lawsuit. We'll call it even. Even? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You stole $45,000, forged my signature, tried to force me to give you another $116,000, and poisoned my grandson against me. What exactly are you bringing to this even trade? We're offering to let you back into Isaac's life. There it was. The nuclear option. They were holding my relationship with my grandson hostage, betting that I loved him more than I loved justice. In the old days, before I learned what they were really capable of, it might have worked. Amanda, you're going to find out something about Marines. We don't negotiate with terrorists, even when they're family. Isaac came running back around the house. Grandpa, there's a cardinal at the feeder, a really red one. I picked him up, feeling the solid weight of innocence in my arms. That's probably Charlie. He's been coming around since your grandmother used to feed him. Can I stay and watch the birds with you? I looked at Amanda over Isaac's shoulder. Not today, buddy, but someday soon, I hope. Amanda was already walking back to her car, phone pressed to her ear, probably calling Christopher to report that the guilt trip had failed. I watched them drive away, Isaac waving from the back seat until they disappeared around the corner. The trial was set for October 12th. We were ready. The courthouse smelled like floor wax and broken dreams. I sat at the defense table next to Elizabeth, wearing my only suit, the charcoal gray one I'd bought for Margaret's funeral. Across the aisle, Christopher and Amanda looked like they'd been cast in a movie about wholesome American families. Christopher wore a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Amanda had traded her usual designer clothes for a modest dress and carried tissues she'd been clutching since they walked in. Their lawyer, Felix Davis, was one of those billboard attorneys whose face was on bus benches across Chicago. He opened with a sob story about broken promises and family betrayal, painting me as a cruel father who'd dangled hope in front of his children just to snatch it away. When Christopher took the stand, he looked right at me and lied through his teeth. He promised us the money, he said, his voice trembling with fake emotion. At Isaac's birthday party, he put his hand on my shoulder and said the down payment was our inheritance early. He said he wanted to see us happy while he was still alive to enjoy it. I listened to him twist that conversation, turning my casual comment about maybe helping with closing costs into a binding commitment for $76,000. He was good at it. I'd give him that. The jury was eating it up, looking at me like I was the villain in this story. Then Felix called Amanda to testify. She walked to the witness stand like she was going to her execution, dabbing her eyes with that tissue. "This has destroyed our family," she sobbed. "My son keeps asking why Grandpa doesn't love us anymore. I don't know what to tell him. We trusted Aaron, and he just abandoned us." Elizabeth let them dig their hole deeper. She barely cross-examined either of them, just asked a few simple questions to lock them into their story. Christopher swore under oath that I'd promised the money. Amanda swore I'd specifically said it was a gift, not a loan. Both of them swore they'd never received a penny from me. Then Elizabeth stood up for our defense. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she said, walking slowly toward them. "The plaintiffs want you to believe this is a story about a broken promise, but this is actually a story about systematic fraud." She pulled out the gift letter, the one Christopher had forged with my signature. Mr. Christopher Sullivan testified that his father never gave him the money he'd promised. But this document, submitted to First National Bank on July 15th, states the exact opposite. It claims that Aaron Sullivan had already transferred $76,000 to his son's account. She handed copies to the jury. The problem is, Aaron Sullivan was 1 to 200 miles away in Phoenix on July 15th, at the VA hospital for his annual medical checkup. We have medical records, security footage, and witness testimony proving he couldn't have signed this document in Chicago. I watched Christopher's face go white. His lawyer was frantically shuffling papers, probably trying to figure out how to distance himself from this disaster. Elizabeth turned to Christopher. "Mr. Sullivan, you testified under oath that you never received the money from your father. But this letter claims you did. So which statement is true?" Christopher looked at his lawyer, then at Amanda, then at me. For a second, I saw the boy I used to know, the kid who'd helped me work on engines, who'd brought me drawings from school, who used to call me his hero. "The bank needed paperwork," he whispered. "The loan officer said we had to show proof of the gift." "So you admit this document is false?" Yes. "And who signed your father's name on this federal banking document?" The courtroom was dead silent. I could hear, the air conditioning humming, could hear Amanda's sharp intake of breath as she realized what was happening. "I did," Christopher said, tears streaming down his face. Judge Harrison's gavel came down like a gunshot. "The court finds for the defendant. All charges dismissed. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the U.S. Attorney's Office for prosecution of federal bank fraud." Christopher broke down completely. Amanda was already on her phone, probably calling a divorce lawyer. But I felt empty. This wasn't victory. It was the death of my family line. The federal charges stuck. Christopher got 3 years in federal prison. Amanda divorced him before the sentencing hearing and moved back to Wisconsin with Isaac. I never got to say goodbye to my grandson. I sold my house and bought a modest Winnebago. I didn't need 4 bedrooms anymore, didn't need a garage full of memories. I set up an irrevocable education trust for Isaac with half the proceeds, $180,000 that would pay for his college when he turned 18. If Christopher ever got his act together, the boy would have a chance at a decent life. I've been on the road for 8 months now, visiting VA hospitals, Marine bases, VFW halls. I volunteer at a mentorship program in Phoenix, teaching young men basic auto mechanics and life skills. These kids remind me of who Christopher could have been if he'd learned that respect isn't given. It's earned. Sometimes I get calls from the federal prison. Christopher's name on the caller ID. I let them go to voicemail, then delete them unheard. There's nothing left to say. I raised him to be a man of honor, but somewhere along the way, he chose to be something else. The road stretches out ahead of me, and I'm okay with that. I learned something important in this whole mess. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. Sometimes the most loving thing a father can do is let his son face the consequences of his choices. Christopher wanted easy money and quick fixes. Instead, he got a federal prison cell and the knowledge that his own greed destroyed his family. That's a lesson worth $450,000, even if it cost me everything else. But here's what I know now that I didn't know before. Family isn't about shared blood or shared names. It's about shared values. The real tragedy isn't that I lost a son. It's that I never really had one to begin with. True wealth isn't what you can give your children. It's what they refuse to take from you.